I'm Renita Malhotra Hora, Director of Marketing and Communications at SRI International, and you're watching The Dish. You're looking at multimodal document intent.
Yes.
What does that even mean?
Multimodality means more than one mode of information. However, in our case, we're very specific to text and image. Document intent is a document analysis technique that basically looks at the intent of the author. So what message were they trying to portray whenever they created this document? And our research was started from an observation that our communication is growing more multimodal. The way that we communicate in this, well, the New York Times dubs it the social media age, is growing to be more vision and text as a combination, as opposed to our traditional streams of media, such as the New Yorker, the New York Times, our newspapers, our books, where it's strictly text. And we've noticed that we are communicating mostly in this multimodal plane, but our document analysis techniques have actually not caught up to this. And our techniques and our machines and our algorithms are way more capable of analyzing the intent of textual information than visual and textual combined.
So you say we are currently in an age of visual literacy, but the research side has not caught up with the development side, or there's a lag between the two. Why is that?
If you observe how education has functioned in the prior centuries and decades, you see a primary focus on reading comprehension, on grammar. So you are taught semantics and syntactics of textual mode of information. What we see now is that the way that we communicate, because now it's more visual and textual combined, either or, but we see a greater presence of visual media. And we are creating our own dialect of sorts that incorporates visual media in the same amount that we incorporate the textual, and that is due to the fact that social media platforms have revolutionized the way that we communicate.
So Julia, in the notes that you sent me, you talked about the semantics of content, and you specifically mentioned meaning multiplication.
Yes.
What is that?
Right. So meaning multiplication is that effect, that event that happens when you're internalizing visual and textual, or any two modes at the same time. So the semantic pointer of, let's say, a sentence. Basically, it means the meaning, so the implied meaning. The semantics of the image, it's the same concept. As opposed to syntactics, which is like what exactly is written, semantics is what are you trying to imply. And what happens is when you internalize multimodal data, so visual and textual at the same time, the meaning is actually created in the interaction of these two semantic pointers. So you can't basically take the post apart and look at these two modes separately. You would miss the meaning. You need to see them working together at the same time. It's a multiplication effect. Let's say you're looking at a post from the New York Times. You would see the caption describing an event. Let's see a car accident happening in Midtown Manhattan, and the image usually depicts that scene. So the semantic pointers of the text say, okay, describing an accident. And the image is parallel to that semantic pointer. It says showing an accident. So that's what we call a parallel relationship. So it's an informative intent. Its intention is to inform you. Both the text and image are working in the same direction. But if you look at a humorous post, let's say something that is more satirical, so you see an image, a selfie of two young women heading out for a night on the town, and the text says 1 year closer to retirement. So the semantic pointer of the textual information says, okay, maybe you could imply that the user is of age if you didn't see the image. And maybe they have some excitement toward retirement. But then you see the image and you see these two young ladies and they have their makeup on, they're looking stellar, and they're heading out. So the semantics are divergent. And it's in these patterns, so when the semantics are divergent, it implies humor, satire, and those means of communication.
You say that up until now, the machine learning community has been limited in their efforts to develop this research.
Yes.
Why is that?
A lot of our work with multimodal information has largely been image captioning techniques. When you're looking at an image and the machine learning algorithm is then trying to provide a caption. So we're trying to translate from visual to textual. And the data that we create, the data sets that we create in order to study and to create these ML algorithms to do that kind of job, they're all very parallel. So they're much like, all the data in those systems are much like that New York Times article, where the image and the text are essentially saying the same thing. And a lot of the times you will see work where individuals attempt to take those same data sets and try to extract higher level meaning, semantics information, so more idiomatic meanings from that kind of data. And we realize that we have been incapable of successfully really capturing that information. And the realization is that at the end of the day, no matter how complex our algorithms get and how intricate our deep neural networks are, we are only as good as our data. And so the data sets that we were looking at, we had applied concepts from media studies and other fields in order to evaluate the data in a way that would create an environment for us to learn satire, to be able to look at data and extract that information and know that this is humor. Humor and satire is one of those areas that we are very excited in having our machine learning algorithms capture that information.
And Julia, what is the ultimate goal?
Our ultimate goal is understanding our communication on these platforms. So it's the full circle perspective on how we're communicating on these social media platforms. So what we were looking at was more locution and illocution, specifically focusing on our locution is our data. So we have our data, okay, this is what the media, this is what the user posted, this is what they said. Illocution is us trying to understand what was meant, what was intended. And the next step would be perlocution, is understanding what was the targeted audience and how did target audience respond. Once we get that full picture, we can understand why certain messages are more successful or stick more to certain demographics than to others. Why are certain users and certain posts more influential than others? We want to understand the full picture.
What about a commercial application? If I'm a company,
Yes.
whatever kind of company I may be, how could I use this?
So there are a couple of applications, and the most motivational one, so this was a concept that had motivated this entire project to begin with, is we want to isolate those users that have a malicious intent, terrorist groups. We mean more hateful speech directed at a certain group, and perhaps once we have this capability, we could have detected or seen evidence of something like the bombings in Sri Lanka. That was a massive movement that had a lot of indicators on social media platforms that we had completely missed. That is one application, but what we find is that you can create user profiles based on the most common intents that they use. And we see correlations between the type of media that you post, so the most common intentions, it says something about your personality as a user. And those users with similar personality traits and intent groups will tend to interact with media that also has those same intent categories. So it would be a great application to link certain user groups with specific media content.
What drove you to be interested in this area of research? Was it an interest in computer sciences, of course,
Yes.
but was it more than that? Did you have a social mission?
You cannot dismiss our communication on social media platforms like you could have maybe 8 years ago. And this is not just informal, communication that we could disregard. This has become one of the most powerful, influential forces in our society. And I was very motivated to, be involved in the initial steps of, learning to understand how people are communicating. And also just one of the most fascinating observations is that our communication also evolves so much quicker now because of these social media platforms. And being involved in that and hopefully being on a project that would be able to study how quickly our communications evolve, it's an anthropological interest of mine.
Thanks, Julia.
Thank you.